Hello, my friends, writers, creatives. If you're struggling with anxiety or you've been overthinking recently or having real self-doubt, or perhaps if you've been feeling really afraid about putting yourself out there or even having relationship challenges, then today's conversation is just for you. I'm joined by the wonderful, gorgeous Danny Greeves. Danny Greeves is a confidence and mindset coach. He is an author and he is a speaker. And also, today's conversation, we're going to be talking about Danny's book. We're going to be talking about confidence, but there's also a lovely little giveaway that we're going to be sharing right at the end. So stick around until the end because Danny has got a confident communicator scorecard. So this scorecard is going to assess where you're at in terms of your levels of confidence, and it's also going to give you tools that are going to help you to move to the next level. So really worth grabbing that one. Without further ado, let me bring Danny into the broadcast studio. Yay. Welcome, Danny. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello. Thank you for having me. A pleasure to be here.
So we're going to be talking about your book, which I've got a little bit of a light reflection there. 6 steps to self-confidence, build confidence, express yourself, and have fun. Before we dive into the content, Danny, I would love to just talk about the writing process with you because, as you know, a lot of my audience are writers. So I'm sure that many of them may have their own teaching nonfiction book that they want to write. So I'd love for you to share, how did you know that you were ready to write this book? And how did you know that you wanted to tackle this subject matter specifically?
Well, to be honest, about 18 months ago, I thought I wouldn't be able to write a book. And it was actually just one of the things that I thought, some amazing people write their books, but, I don't have anything that I would want to put in a book. And it was actually when I went to a business seminar and the guy at the front said the sentence, "It's not the book that you read that changes your life, it's the book that you write." And then when I heard that, I was just like, whoa, okay. And then I just got to thinking, if I did write a book, so it was an if I did write a book, what would I write about? And then that kind of like the juices were flowing over a couple of weeks. I had my journal, I was just making some notes. And then I was like, what do I do spontaneously that I know would be valuable if certain other people did it? And that's when it came to the idea of the thing that I'd spent the last 5 or 6 years putting together was this morning routine that meant I could then go on and set myself up for a great day. So I thought there was no doubt in my mind that was the only thing that I wanted to write about. And so from there, it was really a case of, okay, how do I write a book? So that's where it started.
That's amazing. So 18 months ago, you literally didn't think that you could write a book.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about it, to be honest. I just admired other people who had one.
Yeah. And how did you then find the writing process? So you say that you had an idea for the framework, you wanted to talk about your own morning routine, and that is essentially the 6 steps, the 6 components to your morning routine. So how did you find bringing all of the information together and writing it out? What was your process?
The main thing that I started with was, because I already had my routine, I wanted to break it down so it was a step-by-step process, because I thought that's the way that I do it, that's the way it was put together. And so I didn't really look at too many other styles because I knew that was the one that would work for me. But in terms of how I put it together, that took hours of research, looking in different articles, different places, different podcasts. And if I could do it all again, one of the main things that I would be really aware of is actually that planning stage at the beginning and actually getting the best resources to start with. Because I did it in a really higgledy-piggledy way, and it took a lot longer than I think it could have done in terms of hours. So it kind of just very gradually got there. But fortunately, because I had the 6 steps already,
Yeah.
the structure was kind of already set.
Yeah, that I would say that was probably a real game changer, that you already had that level of structure
Yeah.
involved. And this, for me, as I was reading it, the 6 steps, I love it because confidence can be this thing that we see other people in it and we feel like it's a really nebulous thing. But what's really nice is it's very tangible in this book. You're basically giving us a very robust morning practice. And the principle is that by setting up our day in the right way, we're then going to feel confident as we then go about our day.
Yeah, I like to think of it as essentially each morning you put yourself through a little training routine. So then, regardless of what you come into contact with during the day, you've been sharpening your sword over the last few months in terms of building the skills. So then you come across a challenge or a problem, and you
Mm,
already know what's in your toolbox to be able to help you deal with it. So
yeah.
it's kind of like a mini training program. So whatever you face, you then feel ready for. And I think when it comes to confidence, when we're uncertain about something, then we tend to step back, or we tend to be cautious, or we tend to doubt ourselves. But when we know we've got tools and it's just a case of how do we apply them, then I think we go into things in a completely different energy.
Mm. I think that's such an important thing to point out, Danny, because if we're always stepping back and we're never putting ourselves in that situation, we don't then get to prove ourselves to ourselves. So it's a
Yeah.
bit of a catch-22. The less confident we feel, the less likely we are to put ourselves in a situation where we might prove otherwise.
Yeah, and we have to be able to sometimes take the setback, but then know how to move forwards with it. If we don't have the tools to deal with the setbacks, then we tend to get knocked back and knocked back and knocked back. Whereas if we know, okay, that didn't quite go to plan, that wasn't quite how I envisaged it, but how can I assess that to help me move forwards? Then we start to build momentum. And I
Mm.
think for whatever we're doing, when we've got momentum behind us, we tend to feel a lot more confident. So it's just about building that up.
Mm. I want to go. I've got my little what are they called? Those highlighter things. I want to go to a section that I read. This is quite early on. This is actually step 2, which is the step where you talk about how important personal development is.
Yeah.
And you talk about a workshop that you went to quite early on. This is around, I think it was around 2015, 2016, before you'd really gone on your own journey to really tap into your own confidence. And you talked about a workshop that was really inviting you to talk about an experience that was perhaps traumatic. And at the start of that, you didn't really know that you had a traumatic experience. But I'd love for you to share what went on in that workshop and what you really were able to discover, or what you were able to see, and that kind of truth light bulb that came on for you.
Hmm. Well, I think you've described it very politely by saying I was invited to talk about these things. So essentially, we were in the group, and because I was one of the assistants, the instructor thought, well, we'll use the assistant as an example. So if they break down in tears, then the rest of the class know that that's all right. I wasn't privy to that information. So I was just going about my day trying to learn. And then I was asked to go up the front of the class. So there I popped up to the front of the class, and had this room of sort of 20 people in front of me. I only knew a couple of them. And the instructor said, I'd like you to tell the class about your most emotionally painful moment.
Oh, wow.
And just hearing that question, I remember going, okay. And then as I'm facing this room full of people, I'm just thinking, I don't have anything. Like, there
Mm,
isn't anything that I can think of that
mm,
I would use as my most emotionally painful moment.
mm.
And the instructor wasn't buying that. And apparently, there was something. And then as I just kind of pondered on it a little bit, I could feel the eyes on me. And then just all of a sudden, this memory flipped up. from back when I was 11, and it was sort of that scene where my mum and dad were letting the children know, or letting us know, that they were breaking up.
Mm.
And I was just transported into that moment, and within seconds, just tears and
Mm.
snot and everything was coming out. And I just had no idea it was there. I just did not know.
Yeah.
And then I stumbled my way through the story. I got to the end of it, and then we did a little processing work on it and worked on it a little bit. And then afterwards, the instructor was kind of like, there's some issues there that I think you might
Mm.
want to go and look at.
Mm.
And it was after that where I was just in so much shock that that was sitting there,
Mm.
that I then had to investigate what was going on.
Mm.
And it turned out I had some problems in my life, though, in terms of relationships, in terms of anxiety, but I was ignoring them. I just
Mhm.
wasn't really looking at them. And then when this happened, I kind of reviewed everything through a fresh eye, and then I could really see that I had a fair bit of work to do.
This is an amazing example, Danny. Thanks for sharing that. In that your initial response was, I don't have anything. And it makes me think of how many, amazingly gifted people are out there who don't have a level of confidence that they feel proud of, but they're not aware that there is something in their unconscious that's holding them back. So they kind of just think, oh, well, this is just me. This is just how it is. It took a moment for you to like be in that space where something was being invited out of you to realize, okay, there's something in there. So what would you say to someone who, you mentioned the word anxiety, you mentioned that the instructor was like, there's something here that you may need to go and work on. Where would someone start if they are feeling like, oh, well, maybe something is unconscious, maybe something unconscious is affecting my confidence? Obviously they've got your book that they can go to, but how might they begin to take those first few steps if they're basically saying, no, I don't think I've got anything that's unresolved or anything that's painful?
Well, it's one thing to point out is around the word trauma. So what I'm really talking about is just an event that was significant to you. So that doesn't have to be something huge or massive. It just has to be something that for you at a certain point in time was highly emotional. Because I think sometimes when we think about trauma, we think about some of the more horrendous things on the scale, and then we go, oh, well, nothing like me has happened. Nothing like that has happened to me. But when we think about a significant event, for example, I work quite a lot with people in terms of public speaking. And very, very often it comes down to a memory in early school where they stood up in front of the class, they got something wrong, and then the rest of the class laughed at them.
Yeah.
And although that's relatively small, when you carry that around and it just grows over the years, it ends up being quite a holdback for you. So, in terms of the first steps, the first thing that we need to do is don't allow ourselves to be general. So when I'm generally feeling anxious, or I'm generally feeling a bit low, I'm feeling a bit depressed, and our default response is to actually go, I don't know why. The challenge is really saying, okay, I'm really going to look at this and then go through the different areas in your life. And in the book, I talk about the wheel of life, which is just one tool where
Yeah.
you can go around and assess the different areas of your life and just rank them from 1 to 7 or 1 to 10. And the content is always there. So it's about finding where the block is. And if you're feeling a block in the now, that means there's something in the past that's still holding you back. So getting specific and holding yourself accountable to actually look is probably the first steps, and they're probably the hardest to do. So if the idea of that is like, oh, I get it, it's the most difficult bit, but actually when you've got content to work with, then you can create a plan, then you can create a structure to resolve it, and that in itself helps you feel confident because you know you're going in the right direction.
Yeah. And as I'm listening to you, Danny, and it really comes across in the book as well. And it comes across not just in not just in the tools that you share in the book, but also your own journey. You've had a great deal of support to get to where you are now. You've worked with many coaches, many award-winning coaches who you credit in the book. So I think sometimes we can sort of look at other people and think, oh, well, they were just born confident. It's like it's
Yeah.
either something that you have or you don't have. But what's really clear in this book is it's something that you can learn. But as you were talking about earlier, it's about having a tool so that you can go into a situation, maybe fall flat on your face, but then also be able to like assess and improve and then feel a little bit better about going into that situation
Yeah.
again. So it sounds like, it's been a long-term journey for you with support and investment. You've invested time, you've invested finances.
I invested a lot of time and, to be fair, quite a lot of finance. I maybe didn't do it the wisest way. I put stuff on my credit card, I did payment plans, because what I actually noticed was fortunately the instructors and the coaches that I worked with actually made learning about my mind fun. So it wasn't this daunting, really, tear-filled sessions. There was none of that. Of course, there was emotions there, but it was all coming from a place of being curious and learning, okay, how is it that my mind is doing this? And so I kind of just fell in love with learning about it. And then when it's a learning process, then yeah, you get things wrong. Yeah, things don't quite work out. But because you're really enjoying it, you keep going. So I certainly don't think that everybody would need to go through all of the journey that I've been through. It's because I just really love doing it. And actually, there are some really solid principles that you can learn in a relatively short space of time that can really help build your confidence. But when we bring in that curious piece, then just as you say, you can fall flat on your face. But if you can get up and go, okay, I wonder what was going on there. How did I do that? What could I do differently? And then we start to shift, and all of a sudden we've got a different chemistry.
Listening to you, Danny, that curiosity just really sounds like the game changer, because how many of us, and I'm guilty of this, can fall flat on our face and say things like, well, typical, this is just the kind of thing that happens to me, rather than what you're saying is like, well, what happened there? How can I learn from this? And I think, you and I as coaches, we've got those tools in our toolkit. So we bring them in. But I think even that just as a simple tool to just be curious about the situation, to notice what there is to learn from it. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And one of the interesting, because I like to back things up with research, as you may notice from the book. But in terms of curiosity, what they've found is that actually overrides the fear response. So when we can get into that chemistry, it actually allows us to think differently. So curiosity is something that I think we can all use a little bit more of. And actually, it takes practice. So to be curious, you actually need to put a little bit of work in. And then when you get into that place, then it just makes everything a lot more interesting. So I'd invite people to just see if they can be a little bit more curious.
And that sounds like an important thing to add, that it does take practice, because I think, and I'm guilty of this, to try something that isn't necessarily like a physical skill. Like I wouldn't assume that I could pick up a tennis racket and be able to start playing tennis straight away. But when someone kind of suggests more of a mental skill, I can be harder on myself. I can be like, no, I ought to be able to do this straight away. So
yes, yeah, that's
it's nice, it's nice to have that permission to try being curious and not be that good at it at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I actually spoke to a gentleman earlier today, and he said, oh, I tried meditation and then I stopped. And then when we actually looked at it, there isn't really anything in your life that you're good at that you didn't practice to get there. And meditation is exactly the same. It just takes a little bit of practice. So whatever the skill is, if we come to it from the student perspective and we're curious and we're learning, then we can actually chuckle at ourselves when it goes wrong. Like I can remember trying to do a meditation, and I just could not get a nagging thought out of my mind. And previously I would have probably beat myself up and said that was an awful meditation. But if I think about it as, in order to get good at meditation, those are the types of experiences I need to have to get through, then it kind of reframes it a little bit.
I love that. And actually, so meditation is one of the steps in the book, and that was one of the. Let me just come to it because it was one of the ones that I highlighted. There's a beautiful experience you have. I think at that point, your fiance was out for the evening, and rather than make a gin and tonic or watch something on TV, you were like, "Oh, I'm going to do this Joe Dispenza meditation." I'm a huge fan of Joe Dispenza, and actually, I'm just going to read this section because I found it really, really moving. At the end of the meditation, something amazing happened. It was definitely my voice, but calmer and with total certainty. It felt like it came into my mind rather than it being thought of by me. The sentence was simply, "You became a physio to learn to love your body." So moving. I'm slightly
I
tearing
get
up as
goosebumps.
I'm slightly tearing up as I say that. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about meditation because, yes, I know some people are like, "Oh, I'm useless at meditation and that's why I don't do it." Or they think that moments like this only come to people who are like, uber enlightened and have been meditating for their whole life. So I'd really love for you to share a little bit more around that and like, how meditation has drawn you in and what you really find from it.
Yeah, so I tried the Headspace app initially, and then I did about 10 days of meditation, and then I got a bit bored, and then I left it alone for 7, 8 months, I think. And then I read a couple of Dr. Dispenza's books, and I was engrossed. I thought, okay,
Mm,
I'll start doing his meditations. And they are quite long, and some of them are like an hour and 15 minutes. So I was like,
mm,
I'm not going to do this every day. I don't feel that strongly about meditation. But what I did find was the heart math meditation, which takes about 5 or 6 minutes. And when I started doing that consistently, I just found it a really, really easy way to get grounded back into being me.
mm,
And it's a really easy way to calm my system down. And then I thought, oh, I'll go back to Dr. Joe. And then there was one that I just really got on with right from the beginning. And it was that Friday night. And I would usually have a gin and tonic on a Friday night. And something was different that night. And I thought, I'll
yeah,
do the meditation.
yeah,
And I think the most important thing is I didn't go in with any expectation to have
mm,
any kind of breakthrough moment. And that is the only time I've had that type of experience with meditation. So it's the only one that I've had. But
mm,
even connecting to it, I get goosebumps, and then a little bit of water wells up in the eyes straight away.
yeah,
And then after that, I probably spent weeks chasing it, trying to get that again, and didn't get anywhere close.
mm,
So meditation now for me is a really simple tool where, first of all, I'm taking time out for me, which is just important. It's just 5 minutes or so, but it's for me.
yeah,
I do something that's grounded in science because that's something that I connect to more easily rather than too spiritual. I like to
mm,
keep it a little bit more scientific, and that
mm,
turns out to lead to a spiritual moment. So who'd have
mm,
thought?
yeah,
And it's just a really, really easy tool that I think with a little bit of practice you can really get a lot of benefits from, but it is sticking with it.
mm,
And when you have one of those ineffective meditations, for want of a better word, you just chalk it off as going, that's something that's par for the course. And then you
mm,
go again tomorrow, and then all of a sudden you have a better one. So it's
mm,
just a really handy tool, and it's really easy to do.
yeah. And what have you noticed the benefit for you of meditation in terms of fear or anxiety or confidence or self-esteem? How do you feel that time for you, as you put it, then plays out and provides benefits in your day-to-day life?
In terms of speaking, I'll almost without doubt do a little eyes open meditation in the moments beforehand. And that just helps me get grounded before I'm speaking. So, for people who are maybe speaking up in a meeting or doing a video, like a little bit of meditation just beforehand gets you really grounded. And I think that's
Mm,
just a really helpful tool. And then I use it as something that if I don't do it, I realize I've missed it. And if I
mm,
do it, it just keeps me on track. So it's
Mm,
almost something that is just part of my routine. And
mm,
I've gone from varying degrees of doing an hour and 20-minute meditation to doing a 5-minute meditation. So now I'm kind of more attuned to what do I need? And usually it's a 5-minute one. And
yeah.
so it's nice and short, but
Mm,
actually it's something that I find is one of the most effective tools to
mm.
get yourself grounded. And then you can realize the thoughts that you've been thinking aren't that based in reality, and you've allowed yourself to get taken away a little bit, and it's just bringing you back to then look at things differently.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say you notice it if you don't do it. So that, that to me really speaks volumes in that you may not say have, like you say, this experience came once for you. So it may not be that you have this sort of enlightened experience or this inner voice that comes to speak to you every time. But if you don't do the meditation, you notice it. Those thoughts start to run away with you. I'm the same. Those thoughts for me, if I'm not meditating, they really take over my life.
Hmm. And I think with the stimulation that is out there in the world today, there's so much stimulation there that
Mm,
I think we almost need a little bit of time just to help bring ourselves back down again.
yeah.
When I was looking into what meditation does, the most effective explanation that I found is that it helps us to integrate our thoughts. So, the more emotional charges we have, the more activity we have in the brain. And the more we meditate, the more we can integrate those thoughts, which then allows us to feel more balanced.
Mm,
So, it's a nice way to balance your brain.
mm. That's a nice way to put it. So let's go to another step. And I really so there's a step in the book. So that meditation step 3, the section on journaling. So I know that there'll be many people in my audience, already writers, maybe some of them are journaling. So you make a distinction, which I love, about the difference between keeping a diary and journaling. And I'm just going to read something that really jumped out for me, which I love. Instead of being asked to keep a formal journal, I was advised to write down my thoughts to one question each day. The question remained the same, and I thought my answers would too. So, this is a really interesting one that you're journaling, and this is part of the 6 steps to self confidence. And you're asking yourself the same question each day, and the answer is different. So, tell us a little bit more about that, Danny.
It was the simplest and easiest way to start journaling because I was a bit on the fence about it and I was like, oh, will this help? I mean, I know a lot of your audience will be already so engaged in writing, whereas I wasn't at that point.
Yeah.
And it was just getting me to think about just what would I absolutely love to do. And the first few days, I was like, well, yeah, I had the answer. Then day 2, I was like, oh, that's the same thing. Day 3, it's pretty much the same thing. And then it just started to get almost a little bit more nuanced. And the
Mm,
more I reflected on it, the more I started to add to it. And
mm,
then over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, it's like really evolved into something that was really quite clear. And when I had that clear vision, then I felt so much more inspired to move towards it. And when I
mm.
realized how much it was changing, I was like, it's just one question. How am I doing this?
Yeah.
And I think the more time we dedicate to answering or reflecting on a question, the deeper we go into it. So I think it was really giving myself the time to go deeper rather than keeping it
Mm.
superficial, just going a little bit deeper.
Yeah. And that question, what would you the question here, as you said, what would you absolutely love to do in your life? I think it can really affect our confidence if we don't really know what we want to do. And I think we can be in danger of just accepting that. Like you said, the first couple of days you were like, well, you kind of had an answer, but then you went deeper. And I think there's something about that depth. And like you said, the nuance that you began to find that gave you more inspiration for that vision. And I think somehow that does seem to affect confidence. I don't know what your
Yeah.
thoughts are on like why that happens.
I think it's definitely a case of almost giving yourself permission to keep looking, to know that actually for almost everything, the answer isn't there straight away. And
Mm.
actually, what it takes is a little bit of time, a little bit of persistence, and going through those points where you feel a bit blocked. So the blocks are transient, they're not there permanently. And actually, if you just sit with it a little while, then you can really start to get a different answer. And one of the things that did make a difference, which I'll talk about a little bit later, was when I went to my favorite place in Norwich, which is the assembly house for me. And it's just like this beautiful Georgian building. And when I'm in there with my journal, my thinking's different. My thoughts are just completely different. And then when I start answering those type of questions in that type of environment, I think it unlocks some of the creative juices. So one of the things I love doing is answering an inspiring question in an inspiring environment. I think that does make a difference.
Yeah. It's such a nice example to give. And also what you said earlier about unblocking, I think that can also, for my, my own experience, when I've unblocked something, it gives me such a sense of like, I'm capable of so much, not simply because I've unblocked a block. I'm like, oh my God, like I was thinking to here, and now I realize I can, I can think to here. And that just really gives me a sense of like, almost like how powerful or invincible I am.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love that you're not settling for those first few answers. You're sitting and then you're saying, hey, look, if you're really blocked, take that question to an inspiring place and see what happens.
Yeah. And we just have, like you said, we have so many more resources than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah.
And it's just about finding the little ways and tools that can draw just that extra little bit out of you.
Yeah. I
And I
love
think
that.
that's just giving yourself the space to experiment a little bit. I mean, I tried a couple of places and I was like, oh, I don't think I'll come back here again. And then I found a place where it's just like, oh, it's beautiful, but it took a bit of practice. So treat it as a little bit of a game and give yourself a little bit of time to explore.
That's the second time you've referred to game. Well, the first time you referred to it, you were saying that when you were working with your trainers and your mentors, they found a way to make it fun. And here you're talking about making it into a game. And of course, that's the tagline of the book. It's like 6 steps to self-confidence, but you're having fun. And I think, to me, when you said make a game of it, I was like, that's so important, isn't it? I certainly know, for me in my own personal development journey, I was very serious at the beginning. I was like, I've got issues. I'm hugely anxious. I've got fears. Like, I was very serious about working through it. But my God, what a difference it made when I was starting to have fun and when I was able to laugh about it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'd love for you, like, what experience do you have of, like, potentially when you're working with clients, of that importance of fun, even humor, when it comes to building confidence and overcoming fear?
Humor, I think, breaks the hold of something. So if we go into more a hypnotic approach, then when we are going down a certain train of thought, we have very set expectations. And like a classic joke will lead you down a certain path, and then it'll rapidly change place and lead you in a different destination. So I think when we actually bring humor in, it gets us off that track, and it helps us to shift gears or shift direction a little bit. And then we've got a lighter chemistry. So when we can stay in a lighter chemistry, and we all do the heavy chemistry, and that's all right. But what I like to do is, if I'm doing it, then I almost observe myself doing it, and then I can chuckle at myself and go, what are you doing? And that little detachment from it, and I can chuckle at myself, and then that breaks the hold. So I think you're absolutely bang on. When you talk about that serious, like, I've got to get this sorted, then it's that kind of stress and pressure that then leads us to more maybe black and white thinking. This will work or it won't work. Whereas if we can keep it light, we can keep it more fun, then actually changing how your mind works is fun. Learning how your mind works is fun. And actually, when we keep it that way, then I think we can move at a much faster pace.
Yeah, yeah. This time is shot by Danny. I want to squeeze in at least step 6, which is learning and study. And there was one thing that I highlighted here, which I was really intrigued by. You've got learning's much forgotten twin. So I'd love for you to tell us what learning's much forgotten twin is, and what, why learning and study is so important if we want to improve our confidence.
When we are learning about something that we love, we naturally feel more confident. So
Mm,
the more we engage and the more we take a dive into something that's meaningful for us, then the more our self-worth raises because we're doing something that's important to us. The challenge is, and I think this is huge when it comes to personal development, ideas are everywhere. You can learn so much, but learning often doesn't actually get you the result. One of my mentors taught me that in order to get a transformation, you need a consultation with an expert in that area. You need the ability to get feedback that you're doing it well or you need to make an improvement, and the ability to ask questions. So all of those are based on you implementing what you're doing. So
mm,
learning's forgotten twin is actually putting it into action.
mm.
And I imagine with a lot of your audience, particularly if they're thinking about a book or they've got ideas about it, the proof of the pudding comes in actually getting going, getting started, getting some action. So that's really a challenge because a lot of the time we think I can just learn more information, whereas actually it's when we do it that we get the experience, and that's where the gold is.
Yeah, and that experience, or like you said, the getting the feedback when you're practicing it or you're implementing it or being able to ask questions, it just, for me, it takes me from that place of uncertainty, because I might have learned something, but I might still be like, am I going to be any good at this?
Yeah.
Am I going to be able to do it? So that moment when I do get to try it out and I'm like, okay, it wasn't as bad as I thought I was going to be.
Yeah.
you know, it wasn't such a train wreck. I find that can be really satisfying.
Yeah. And I think it's so important, isn't it, to feel it, to know it.
Yeah, for me, that's how I learn. Like, it's totally experiential. I've got to have something going through my body for me to
Yeah.
be at least be able to remember it, and to have an experience of it.
Yeah.
So we're going to pop a link below where people can grab this book. We've literally just touched the surface. There's so much in this. It's like I said to you, Danny, before we started broadcasting, it's a seriously robust book. There are so many resources in here. I feel like it's one of those books that you want to have on hand. Like, it's not just read through it once. It's like, no, this is a book that you want to have on hand. But tell people quickly, we said that we were going to share your Confident Communicator scorecard. So tell people a little bit about that, and we will pop a link for that in the description below.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that when we're really general, that's when it can be a little bit of a muddle to find out, okay, how can we take a step forwards? So what the scorecard does really simply, and it'll probably take about 3 minutes to complete, is it asks you some really specific questions to help you find out where your current block is. And then it will give you some tailored exercises to actually start to move that dial forwards. And then you'll also get a hypnotherapy recording to just help you get a bit of a nudge in that direction as well. So the idea is we can use the 80-20 rule to find out what the biggest block is and then help you moving to get you a quick win.
Amazing. What an amazing resource, Danny. So we will pop that in the description below, folks. Danny, it's been a huge treat to reconnect, because it's been a while since we've seen each other. And yeah, I've really enjoyed chatting with you today, and it's really lovely to get to share you with my audience. Is there anything else that you want to say, anything else that you want to share that I perhaps didn't ask you?
I think you covered everything. I just really want to say it was such a pleasure to reconnect with you as well. It's been a while, but I always know that we have a great chat when we do. And thank you
Yeah.
for inviting me on.
Amazing. Thanks, Danny. So, folks, we would love to hear from you. What are your takeaways from today's conversation? If you've got questions, if you've had any aha moments, please share them in the comments below. I always love to hear what you gain from these sessions. So drop something in the comments below and let me know. Danny, take care. See you soon.
Bye.